Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. And good afternoon if you are in Malaysia. Good morning if you are in Qatar with Professor Luai. And peace and greetings wherever you are. Ladies and gentlemen, first and foremost, I would like to warmly welcome everyone who have joined us in Zoom as well as the live stream on Facebook to the International Institute of Advanced Islamic Studies, IAIS Malaysia's second ICTS for the year. The ICTS or Islam and Civilizational Talk series is a series of public talk initiated to enhance the knowledge base and discussion on topics related to Islam and inter-civilizational interactions, as well as contemporary issues related to it. In this series, expert panelists from around the globe are invited to share their thoughts and cutting-edge research with the audience. For this Islam and Civilizational Talk series, we are deeply honored to host globally renowned political scientist and Muslim scholar, Professor Luai M. Safi, who will be speaking on the rise of the East-West tension and its impact on Muslim countries, rethinking international relations through the Islamic perspective. Before I pass the floor to Professor Luai, please allow me to provide a brief introduction of our guest of honor. Professor Dr. Luai M. Safi is currently Professor of Political Science and Islamic Thought at Hamad bin Khalifa University in Qatar and Senior Fellow with the Institute of Social Policy and Understanding ISPU in Washington, D.C. Dr. Safi has taught at several universities, including Wayne State University, Michigan, the International Islamic University of Malaysia, George Washington University, Indiana University and Purdue University at Indianapolis, IUPUI, as well as Georgetown University. Dr. Safi is the author of 20 books, including Islam and the Trajectory of Globalization, published by Routledge, The Foundation of Knowledge, published by IIIT, The Quranic Narrative, published by Prager, and Tensions and Transitions in the Muslim World, published by the University Press of America. He speaks on issues of globalization and global governance, human rights and democracy, and appeared on numerous radio and TV programs all over the world, including in North America, the Middle East, Europe, and across Asia. So without taking more time, I pass the floor to Professor Luai.
Thank you, Mr. Wan Naim, for the introduction. And I would like to thank also the International Institute of Advanced Islamic Studies for giving me this opportunity to talk about an important topic, the rise of the East-West tension and its impact on Muslim countries. This is a subject that's of concern to both those who are focusing on academic work, as well as the general public, those who work in the industries, the economy, and business. It's a very important question for us to contemplate. My aim here is really to provoke thinking about possible alternative ways of looking at international relations and the globalizing society that we are part of. So maybe that's hopefully will provoke some thought and maybe a good discussion afterward. So let me begin by, first of all, try to define this term East-West and East-West tension in particular. We're talking about a rising tension between the East and the West. And the reference here is not really to the geographical East and the geographical West, but what we are seeing is a geopolitical struggle between states and powers that are defined as Eastern and Western. And of course, this East-West tension took different flavors over the centuries and the decades, But currently, it seems that the tension is between three major global powers: the United States, Russia, and China. And of course, the main interest here is to see where Muslim societies and countries fit within that tension and how that tension is going to impact on their lives. Okay, now notice that we're talking about tension. We are not talking about conflict, but definitely in international relations, tensions have always the propensity, the inclination to create conflicts and clashes. Most recently, we started to see those clashes in Eastern Europe, particularly in Ukraine. The Ukraine war probably provides us a case study of that geopolitical struggle, in this case between the United States and its Western allies and Russia, supported by China, and interestingly, supported by Iran and Turkey trying to play a more moderating role, but we'll come back to that shortly. So it's a tension mainly grounded in geopolitical interests, that is, in economic and political interest, whereby each of these three major powers are trying to expand their sphere of influence beyond their borders and, of course, beyond even their region. So it's a sort of a global geopolitical struggle that's taking place as we speak. Now, we often, of course, hear that this struggle is between democratic and autocratic forces. That's to say, between forces that would like to expand the political freedom of people around the world, on the basis of the notion of equal dignity of all people, and those states that are trying to dominate and to create closed societies and centralized societies under powerful autocratic individual or regime. Well, what I would like to say here is really this is not true anymore. The struggle between the three forces are really about domination. There is no concern today for democracy. There was a point in the history of the global order, the 20th century global order, where democracy became an important element for to be advanced, particularly by the United States. If you may recall, first, President Woodrow Wilson in the 1917 was very instrumental in founding an international organization called the League of Nations. And this organization was supposed to implement international law and to live according to the rules of international law and to promote that kind of interaction. This happened after World War I, a very disastrous war that really led to the destruction of people and properties. The second attempt to create a global order based on some sense of egalitarian principles was after World War II, when Franklin Roosevelt was instrumental in building the United Nations and adopting international law as an instrument for international relationships. And in fact, the United Nations has created a commission to decolonize countries that were colonized by European powers mainly. But that interest of advancing egalitarian systems and democracy, that is, ended in the 80s with the coming of the American president, Ronald Reagan, and of course, the rise of neoliberalism. Because the neoliberalism, although it has this liberalism attached to the title, it's really a worldview that is not committed to egalitarian principles. It is about creating social hierarchy. So countries today, including the United States, have been really supporting autocratic regimes, and in fact, corporate America has been instrumental in building social hierarchies across the world. I'm not going to delve into that question because I don't have time today, but that's some part of the overall picture. So what I'm saying is that the struggle is about really geopolitical interest, and there is no vision anymore of advancing global institutions, that's to say the United Nations organizations that have done a lot of good work and continue to do a lot of good work, but with decreasing support by major powers who always put their own geopolitical interests over and above international law, and only recall international law when it suits their own self-interest. So where do Muslim countries fit in this kind of equation between East and the West? And again, I'm not talking about geographical East. In fact, Australia, which is an Eastern country geographically, it is part of the political West, part of the geopolitical interests that are represented by the United States, and it's a very close ally of the United States. Now, where do the Muslim countries fit in this equation? Well, practically what has been happening over the last decades is that most Muslim countries, and most of them are really very small countries in comparison with the three major powers we are talking about. All these countries, their foreign policy and their main stance and approach has been to sort of align with one important political power, or sometimes shift alliance and realign themselves with others when this particular global power does not provide enough support for their own interest. It is not necessarily a bad strategy given the disparity of power, both economic and political. But definitely, this is a strategy that has created a lot of pain in Muslim societies because, as I pointed out earlier, Western democracies have not been pushing toward egalitarian politics in most Muslim countries. They had no difficulty supporting autocratic regimes as long as they advance their own interest, and the whole notion of democracy or making the world safe for democracy. By the way, this was the slogan of Woodrow Wilson around the turn of the 20th century, the early decades of the 20th century. This slogan ironically was replaced by another slogan, particularly among conservative America and American forces, making the world safe for America. This, by the way, was the title of an important paper published by a very influential American think tank called the Heritage Foundation, in which it argued that the US foreign policy should aim at making the world safe for America. And so it's, again, this is very exclusive interests that have been pushed by the greatest democracy currently on the global stage. Sad, but true. So, in this sort of cluster of what we call Muslim countries, which are really many countries spreading from West African coast to the East Asian coast, which would include countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, and then the South Asian countries like Pakistan and Bangladesh. So these countries, with the exception of three, are small in size, in terms of their economy, in terms of their political influence, and that matters on the world stage. And these countries, despite many attempts to get united, are still divided. In fact, in some cases, are fighting among themselves over peanuts, and their fight often doesn't serve their own interests and the interests of their populations, but serve the interests of main global powers. Probably there are many examples if you look at the Middle East in particular. So the exception here, we have three countries, Turkey, Iran, and Indonesia, who have the size, and they have increasingly been sort of influenced by Islamic values and ideas to try to ground themselves not in the East nor in the West, but in their own moral system of values. Now, the attempts are still very very early on. We can't really judge how they are going to do, but probably given their size and given their ability to maintain some sort of independence from influence from the East and the West, they could be a good candidate to lead in the direction of transitioning Muslim countries from their current strategy to a strategy that will not only benefit their own people, but will push to a new view of international relations. And that's where I would like really to spend a few minutes here to talk about that, about what is required for Muslim countries to move from a situation where they have to align themselves behind the interest of major powers, hoping that they can also get some benefits, and to a strategy where really the aim is to go back to the very egalitarian principles that were envisaged when something like the League of Nations and later the United Nations were put in power, and where the notion of international law became sort of the reference of international relations. This was a very short-lived period. For example, Woodrow Wilson was behind the foundation of the League of Nations to try to stop these imperialistic tendencies of European countries. But the Congress didn't ratify that agreement, and the United States left the League of Nations, never joined it. But ironically, the League of Nations was used by two imperial European powers, France and Britain. Of course, imperial then, not necessarily now, although France is still, to a great extent, an imperial power in Africa. They used it to issue a mandate that allowed them to control and to invade the countries of the Near East and to divide them into, Syria, Lebanon, these small countries that can be easily manipulated and controlled. So the second attempt at establishing a global organization that brings some sort of equality or parity between different nations happened after World War II. And the two movements or political leaders that pushed to achieve that were really students of what we call today rational idealism. And that would be really the thing that I'm going to propose here for us as a way to contemplate. I know this is a grand vision, a grand thinking, but definitely any major changes in the history of humanity always begin with a few steps, but at least there is a big goal ahead. And I think the Muslim countries, in order to free themselves from their current positioning, whereby they are always manipulated by major powers, because they have to align themselves, as I said, to survive. And that's open the door for manipulation and for exploitation of those countries and populations. The shift should be toward, there's no way for the Muslim countries to rise up again and to build some sort of, zone of freedom for them, and then to expand that zone of freedom to engulf the entire global system without having a new vision. And I think the new vision has proven already that it is very applicable, it's very workable, despite the fact it is really idealistic. And let me explain that. So what we need today is to change the nature of the foundational thinking that govern international relations, and that is political realism. All countries today, all political leaders today, when they think about international relations, they think about they think within the framework of political realism, which is thinking that is focusing on the notion of power and of interest. And by that, I mean exclusive interest of each country. I mean, that is natural, definitely all people, all the groups would like to advance their own interest. But then this advancement of self-interest should be governed by an international law, an international system of laws and of values. And that's where rational idealism could be the solution for us today to free ourselves from the grip of political realism that has tied the hands of the leaders of Muslim countries. Now, what is rational idealism? Of course, the rational idealism, as we know it today, I give two examples from the 20th century. This is what's called sometimes progressive liberalism or classical liberalism, not today, but in the 20th century, that led into the development of international law, international organizations, but that was short-lived because of the onslaught of neoliberalism. And neoliberalism allowed, global corporations free hand to try to exploit the wealth and the economic interests of the entire humanity. That is not only unsustainable, but is very destructive globally and locally. It started to become destructive even for Western countries that really play a major role in this neoliberal push. And this neoliberal push even became part of the policy of China. I mean, this Communist Party today, in fact, it follows a very neoliberal politics, which very informative. They don't see it like contradicting with their own very centralized political authority. Because as I said earlier, neoliberalism is not about establishing egalitarian political system where all people and all nations, their interests and their dignity is taken into account. But it pushed towards social hierarchy, where some people are seen like, more deserving than others, not on the basis of what they do, but on the basis of who they are, what race they belong, what geography they belong. And that is unacceptable from a rational idealist point of view, because this rational idealism is grounded in monotheistic ethics, in the ethics of Tawheed, because rational idealism that started, maybe the most important representative of that school would be someone like Immanuel Kant in the West, and Hegel to some extent, who came after them, and a long line of people who pushed toward international human rights. So today, when you find organizations and individuals pushing for international human rights, these are really rational idealists. They don't really buy the real political approach to international relations that say, well, all that matters is power, and states has to push to advance their own power, even at the expense of others. And we saw that that expense could also mean at the expense of the dignity of others, not only their economic well-being, but their dignity and the ability to live in a world where they are safe and their kids are safe and they have the basic needs, their basic needs met. Now, that rational idealism really is the product, the creation of the, historically, the creation of monotheistic traditions. It started to take shape really under Islamic rationalism, because Islamic rationalists worked hard to create a global order, and Islam really created the first global order where people across the world, regardless of their religion and ethnicity, could really trade and move around and get education and have the freedom of worship, the freedom to have their own communities. This order was established by Islamic rationalism on the basis of global egalitarian pluralism. That was the system. And of course, there are many people who have spoken to that. Most notably, Marshall Hodgson, in his book, The Venture of Islam. I would advise you to read that book. It's a huge book, 3 volumes. But also he has another publication, I think it's titled Rethinking International, either international or world politics, something like that, was published. It's just much smaller. It's like a small pamphlet that explained what he meant by the first Islamic globalism that he said is stretched out from the 7th century to the 16th century and even into the 17th century, where Islamic civilization, Islamic society were very much not only vibrant themselves, but they created a lot of way for different communities to live with reasonable autonomy and with mutual benefits and trade exchange and cultural exchange and educational exchange. So Hegel, also the German philosopher, in his philosophy of history, spoke to the fact that it was Islam that first brought political authority under the control of moral ethics. So he said before that there were no civilization in which people in power were expected to abide by ethical conduct, not even the Roman Christian civilization. But it started by Islam, by Muslims, but then Europe caught up with that kind of new thinking 8 centuries later, he says, with the religious reformation and the rise of the modern West. But then the modern West, while it cherished the principles of justice, freedom, equality, but it did not really push this concept beyond its borders and justified colonialism and control in the name of making those uncivilized people civilized, or what the French philosophers call the burden of the white man burden. So we need to go back into those traditions. And those traditions are not so sort of a utopia as political realists try to depict them. They are possible. In fact, we have instances where they have been applied, either under Islam or under this short-lived classical liberal era, which has been overtaken by by new liberalism. And that, of course, started in the early 80s under Ronald Reagan and what became known as Washington Consensus, where the IMF was created with the World Bank, and then now 4 decades later, everybody is in debt. Every country in the world is in debt, including Western countries. And in fact, almost every citizen of those countries is in debt. So the level of debt, national debt, personal debt, corporate debt, is probably going to have very serious consequences on the global order we live in. And some of us started to feel that impact even today. So let me then try to conclude by summing up what I'm trying to say here. I hope I spoke with some clarity. I know it's very condensed presentation, but hopefully the Q&A could maybe clarify some of those very brief, very shorthand expressions that I used to take advantage of time. So here, in this short, brief talk about the East-West tension, this tension is real, is becoming more serious because, as I said, all these 3 major powers that are creating the tension today have left completely any notion of a better future based on the rule of law. All of them are really advancing very exclusivist national interest, or sometimes regional interest. Maybe the United States pay more attention to European interests than, let's say, the interests of people in the Middle East or in South Asia or in Southeast Asia. But that's not good enough. That shouldn't be really the norm. Humanity is capable of doing better because it has shown that this can be done, and it was done historically. But what we need today is that we need a new generation of people who think in a different way. We should think, and of course, that is the essence of all monotheistic messages and revelations, that we can't just care about our own, particular Muslims. Let me talk to Muslims now. Maybe most of the listeners come from that community. No, Islam really from day one talked about al-alamin. It was a message concerned with the well-being of the whole humanity. And in fact, in very explicit terms, defined the mission of the final prophet, according to the Quranic message, as he was sent but mercy to humanity. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. This was the essence of his mission. And anyone who studies his life, he could see that really his main concern was not about helping his own followers necessarily alone, but even helping people who belong to the other camp, who have been really even brainwashed or have been captured by the dynamics of the society in which they lived. And those societies were really either imperialistic or controlled by a very dominant minority trying to exploit the majority. So Muslims have a particular responsibility as, first of all, as intellectuals, as scholars, but as politicians as well, as political leaders and business leaders. They have the responsibility of rethinking the way they envisage the relationship across the world. So international relations has to be defined according to rational idealist terms. And by that, I mean the principles of justice, equality, freedom, and compassion have to come back to be a very important principles for organizing a human society. This is more urgent given the fact that the world today is moving toward a globalizing society where national borders becoming less important, and where humanity is interacting and have common interest on every level. So that put extra burden, particularly on Muslim scholars and institutions, Islamic institutions of higher learning, like the organization that is hosting this program, and I'm glad that they have really thought to present this kind of discussion. And of course, it is the burden of Muslim leaders who have become so beholden to political realism, meaning just interest and power, interest and power. Well, these are important. We need interest and power, but these interest and power will make sense, can be sustainable only when they are sort of limited within a moral framework. They have to work within a moral framework where one nation does not advance its economic interest at the expense of the dignity and even the well-being of another nation, whether it's near it, at the border, or far away. And again, those borders are becoming less rigid and more fluid. So that is really what my message here, my conclusion in this presentation, that we need to change things. It might sound like a very tall order, which I wouldn't really underestimate that effort. But clearly, every big project, every big dream starts with very few steps. And this beautiful Chinese proverb that we all are aware of, that a journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. So we need to have the step, we need to have it in the right direction. And Muslim intellectuals must lead, because really they inherited these monotheistic values that started with Abraham, and then with the Musa and the Jewish community, and then the Christian, and then the Muslim community received it. And what is different about Muslims is that with the finalization of prophethood, then all the effort were put on the shoulder of scholars, who has to reason out, who has to come with ideas to show how those universal values embedded in revelation can be lived and can be translated into human models and social models. And by that, I mean institutions and relationships. I look forward to the Q&A, and thank you again for listening.
Thank you very much, Professor Luai, for your very succinct yet informative presentation on a very important topic. So we have here like 1, 2, 3, 4 questions, but I think we should start with 2 first. If I may read it to you, the first one is by Mr. Said Zulfakar. How do we deal with historical experience of Muslims and Western conceptions towards concepts such as democracy? For example, Muslims might view democracy as a foreign intervention due to the installation of despot rulers, erosion of religious values based on their historical experience. So Westerners were often perplexed when they saw Muslims rejecting the notion of democracy. Different understanding of these concepts leads to tension between East and West, although both might actually aspire towards the same values. So maybe the first question is how to bridge the gap between Muslims and Westerners on similar concepts, but maybe due to historical experiences. So the second one is by Mr. Muhammad Talib Faiz. How optimistic it looks that the three countries mentioned by you can challenge and overcome the influence of mainstream Muslim countries organization like the OIC. Moreover, how do you see the role of OIC in the constantly changing geopolitical dynamics? So the 3 countries will be Turkey, Iran, and Indonesia. So maybe we start with 2 first.
Okay, so with regard to democracy, I mean, when I speak to Muslims, I use the word shura. Democracy, the essence of democracy is consultation, isn't it? That the community should engage in consultative effort before a decision is made about some major issue confronting that community. And before that, it's about holding political rulers accountable. It's about the accountability who assume public office. That's really what sure, but to me, the basic notion of democracy, and which is a counterpart to the basic notion of shura. So we need shura, we need democracy, so we can hold those who are in office accountable. They can't just enrich themselves using the national treasury. They can't abuse the population in the name of whatever. So the public must have its own institutions to uphold them responsible. Historically, the institution was the institution of Muslim scholars, because Muslim scholars were legislators. Rulers never were able to legislate historically. Now, with the rise of modern state, scholars have become employees of the state. So whoever has political power can appoint or dissolve the position of any scholar involved in legislation. Whether, I mean, this legislation, by the way, was mainly moral legislation upheld by the community. So the rulers have to respect and to be mindful of the anger of the community if they violated what everybody believed. These are the principles of Tawheed, of faith. So then, I mean, the question becomes how to organize the community based on these principles. And to be honest with you, this is an open question. It doesn't have to be in accordance with what Western countries have done. Definitely, they have shown us, particularly us, the Muslims, that you can have a political system where their leader can be held accountable. Yeah, we know that this has decreased tremendously, and some leaders are being able to act above the law. But there were times when the leaders within those communities would have to resign and may be subjected to criminal proceeding if they violated the law. So that's where we have to figure out our own model. That's where our thinkers, intellectuals, and our specialists and scholars have to play a role. Now, with regard to the second question about the OIC and the three countries. Now, I mean, the three countries have the potential, definitely, because as I said, they have human resources, they have a large territory, they can be pushed around easily, like small countries, with the friction number of the population of some of those major powers. And they have shown recently that some of those countries have really started to challenge and to try to curve for themselves a place within the international scene. Turkey have done in the last decade, and so a lot to express itself as a global power player. Of course, it's paying a high price currently, but I could see that the price can be overcome. Really, they still have the potential because the strength of any society is in its own people. The human capital is the real capital. Everything else can be achieved through this particular capital. Iran has also tried to curve itself place. Now, as you can see in this alignment between East and West, they have been in the middle almost, but clearly Turkey is wavering between once aligning with Turkey, with Russia, and once aligning with Western societies based on some principles, announced principles, and at occasions cooperating even with Iran in defiance of the wishes of the American leadership. So, so I think probably what is the difference between these three countries and OIC? OIC has been the total sum of individual countries that many of them or the majority of them, come under autocratic rule, under special interest of very small community that has not been able to provide a vision for their societies. Of course, Malaysia, at least for a while, I think today things are a bit dicey, but for a while, it was able to build a strong society because of a good vision. But then the ethical foundation of that vision is being tested today. I pray that the nation can survive that test in a positive way. But then if you look elsewhere, you find every country in the Muslim world is run by autocratic regime, either military or monarchical society with little room for people to engage and to provide their opinion and to hold the rulers accountable for whatever they are doing and how they are spending the national wealth. That's why OIC was the sum total of this kind of country. And then if you add really fractions, you end up with almost a fraction, particularly if those fractions are very small. While Turkey, Iran, and recently Indonesia seem to be embarking on a new vision to rebuild themselves, to rethink the foundation of their politics and their policies. Unsuccessful completely, because no nation can really rise up over a decade or even over a few decades. It takes time. The process of nations rising up to a high level of human performance takes generations. It's intergenerational project that somebody has to start it and the rest have to build on it. If they don't build on a good foundation, then they will never go up. In fact, they could go down again. So that would be my, I don't know whether that's explained a lot or not, but what I'm saying simply, it's all upon us, upon the citizens of those countries, upon the intellectual leaders of those countries, upon the political leaders of those countries. If nothing would change, we are continue to be a political realist, thinking, well, I mean, what can we do? I mean, there is a lot of limitations on us. Yeah, there are a lot of limitations, but a good vision can help us push those limitations and increase and enlarge the envelope around us. So it will come a time where really there is a very huge room for this population to maneuver and to work together and hopefully to bring new vision for international relations based on rational idealism. Not to abandon completely realism. I'm not really advocating that we have to be always idealist. Realism has a place, but within the compound, within the boundaries of the framework that is based on our ideals, on justice, equality, freedom, and we have to add compassion, because this rahmatan lil alameen is also at the core of who we are as monotheistic community. And if you do that, then you'll find other monotheistic communities will take the lead from us and will follow us.
Thank you very much, Prof. We have 4 more questions. I don't know if we can have the time to answer all of them, but if you may answer each of them,
I'll try to be short. Okay.
Very concise. I think the next question is related to your last statement. It's also by Mr. Muhammad Talib Faiz. Maybe I just read 4 of them in a go, and if you forget, I can read it again to you.
Let me write them down. You can have them all. Yeah.
You can also see the questions on Zoom actually.
Oh, let me do that. Yeah.
In the Q&A section.
On Zoom, not on chat.
In the Q&A.
Okay, I'll write them down. Go ahead.
So it's by Muhammad Talib Faiz. How do you see the international human rights organizations, which gives the impression of serving the interests of Western powers, especially in developing or underdeveloped countries, and how these international human rights organizations can be trusted to champion those rights? The next one is by Ms. Nur Jannah. What are your views regarding Malaysia, and is Malaysia affected by this tension between East and West as a Muslim country, and how would you suggest Malaysia to balance trying to achieve a democratic developed status and still preserve its Islamic principles? The third one is by Ms. Nabila. You mentioned that social hierarchy, the idea of social hierarchy is not utopian, and it has been achieved before. But if I may ask, the example from history regarding this social hierarchy, I would like to question the time when world order was driven by religious missionary before nation-state model, yet egalitarian society was not maximized by people at the time. And the last one is by Mr. Ararat Kostanian. How realistic it is to give a solution to to solve the political divisions within the Muslim world that has been perpetrated by the global order to divide and rule. Moreover, within the Muslim world, there is also the competition of becoming the leader of the Muslim world. So that's I think the last 4 questions for today. If you want me to repeat them, I'll be...
No, I wrote them down. That's fine. Okay, let me start with the first one with regard to human rights organizations. Do they advance Western interest? Now, for one thing, we can say that really they have Western biases, because all of us, we have biases as a human, because we really belong to particular culture, particular society, and we see the world through our own vantage point. That's human. That's why sometimes conflict arises, even by people who have good intentions, and without a good system to mitigate their differences, then they could really hurt each other, whether they are individuals or groups or societies. So Western, intellectuals and those who work for those organizations have their own biases, in the sense that they see the world through their own vantage point. But having said that, we have examples of good international human rights organizations that really have been speaking against the abuses of autocratic governments all over the world. Maybe what comes to mind often is this Amnesty International and the American Watch, the Human Rights Watch. Now, the ability of any NGO to really be true to its own principles have to do with 2 elements. First, whether those who run those organizations believe in those values, are committed to them. Number 2, whether they have independent financial support. They are not financed by corporations or by governments that are engaged in abusive behavior. And the secret of the success of these 2 organizations is that they have independent financial base. They depend on contributions from ordinary citizens, and they have become increasingly really sort of accepting, or members of their own organizations come from very diverse background. There are many Muslims who work currently with, for example, but also that will extend also to people from South America and from Africa, who work for the Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International. And remember, I'm using these 2 organizations as examples. So, Amnesty International has declared the policies recently, the policies of Israel as perpetuating a state of apartheid. Well, this is nobody in the West would dare make that, has dared so far to make such a bold statement, but human rights organizations have done that. So there is a really, We cannot have this blanket statement. I'm sure there are others who claim to push freedom and human rights and even democracy, but they are pushing very small agenda. They want to have sort of followers to follow their own societies in other parts of the world. With regard to Malaysia and the Islamic principles, I mean, one clear thing about Malaysians is that really take Islam seriously. And they care about their rulers to be within the boundaries of what they see as Islamic. Never mind, of course, that you don't see Islam the same way. So there's a lot of room of interpretation there. But still, I mean, the popular passion is with those who try to advance Islamic principles, because for them, these principles are really about their own self-interest as well. It's about justice, about equality, that they should be treated equal to others, and not be taken advantage of, to be treated with compassion. So the government should care about their own challenges and provide programs to uplift their conditions. So that's really what I know about Malaysia, and I have spent a good time in Malaysia. But unfortunately, there is a large number of Malaysian politicians who have really, groomed within the real political school. So they think about politics in this like hardball, about my own self-interest, and I have to win at every cost, even if my opponent will bring better results to the nation. That's not my concern, And unfortunately, people reward some of those leaders, maybe because they're so clever to hide their real intentions, or because of alignment of interests. So society is a very complex place. And I think the problem with Malaysian politics for a while has been, and of course that has been culminated by this latest sentence against the former prime minister, which really brought a lot of hope to many Malaysians, I'm sure, and to many people around the world who care about justice and dignity, that maybe things can be rectified. So the future is difficult to address and to predict, but I feel that Malaysia has the potential really, because it has proved itself is capable of that, to rise to a higher level of political life. And I don't want to really talk about the current competition. It will not be fair to engage in this kind of general statement, a very detailed and complex internal politics. But my hope is that those who really have commit themselves to the Islamic ideals truly through their actions, not their statements. Statements are cheap, actions are tough. Those who have stood behind what they believed is right for the country, they believe behind justice, equality for all, and really equality for all is important. I know there is some debate about that because of the pluralistic cultural scene in Malaysia, but I believe Muslims should really stand behind this equality for all, because not only that is Islamic, because this prophet and this religion advance the notion of rahmatan lil alameen, the mercy for all humanity, not only for the believers alone. And that's why it became like the religion that we know it today. And that would be my hope. Now I will have to move. How much time I still have?
I think 5 more minutes.
5 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, then I'll have 2 minutes for each. Now, in terms of the applicability of what I'm saying, it's a good question. And of course, it's always easy really to shoot dreamers when they dream about something that doesn't seem possible today, to shoot their eyes and say, well, these are like utopic, or like these are dreamers. But if you think about it, I mean, the world have really advanced historically because of those dreamers, because of people said something that seemed, impossible, but became possible. And the universe respond to those who really advance good principles, because the universe is really built, and we Muslims must be aware of that. We built on the principles of justice. And so the Quran says, وَلَوْ اتَّبَعَ الْحَقُّ أَهْوَاءَهُمْ لَفَسَدَتِ السَّمَاوَاتُ وَالْأَرْضِ. If the truth would follow their vain thought, the entire universe would have collapsed, because this universe is built on the same principles that we humans that have been given this domain we call Earth are asked to use them to build our own universe, our own globe. These come from the same source. And this is about justice, as I said, about respect of the diversity, respect of the dignity of other human beings who are brothers and sisters, even if they are of different religions, because the Quran tells us that we are all come from one pair of male and female. So now the missionaries really did not really act to bring a new vision. They acted to convert people to Christianities or to Islam, for that, because we start to see Muslim missionaries, although Muslims never had this kind of approach to other human beings, not by having like missionary people who just want to convert, but we Muslims were always interested in supporting others, supporting their rights, educating them, and letting them really to settle to their own faith and respect whatever they decided to see as their religion. We have to come back to that tradition. So it's not missionaries that can make those ideas possible. It is ordinary people. It is through the interaction between people in South Asia and some of those really business people. They were traders coming and interacting with the population, and through their model, through their behavior, through the way they spoke with others, the way they dealt with others, have brought light into the life of others. So you don't have to send missionaries really to bring people to the true faith, because it's the faith of the fitrah, as you all know. Finally, how realistic idealism? I think that's the last question. Maybe that's how I understood the question. How realistic, which is relevant to what I just said. It is not realistic in the sense of succumbing to the real world as we see it today. As such, you can be realistic.
If I may interject,
yeah, go ahead.
The question is how realistic rational idealism as a solution for the political divisions within the Muslim world.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I mean, it doesn't seem like difficult to answer this question, because why there is political division? Because the political evaluation is often done on the basis of interests and rarely on the basis of values. Values come from idealism. So often people, when they talk about justice in current politics, and probably you find them in Malaysia as well, they talk about their own justice. So they want others to do justice to them as they see it. But they never think, well, are we doing justice to other people around us who are different in some way? So yeah, the problem, people they fight each other when they only are consumed with their own self-interest. When they caution their interest or limit their interest with some high values, then they can work with even the people who don't share with them their faith or their culture, because all humans care about justice. And when you do justice to all, then you have a better chance to work with people not only within your community who belong to different parties, but when we start to sanction lies, when we started to sanction injustice, when we start to sanction special interest, then we are all doomed. Not necessarily tomorrow or the year after, but one generations maybe later or one decade later, then we are going to bring up a new generation that really will bring those misdeeds back to haunt us, because we have seeded those kind of decisions and behavior in our own community, and they will grow up and will become our own enemies. So yeah, I know this is a very general statement. Maybe we need to take case by case and do some case study. But I have done a lot of case studies. I've looked at a lot of those conditions. And in the long run, what is sustainable really is what is based on the transcendental principles that were brought by monotheistic traditions on justice, on equality, on freedom, and on compassion. When you have these, then you'll have a long-term sustainable political society that can be not perfect, because no one can be perfect, as you all know. Humans are imperfect by their very nature, by being transient and self-interested, but at least in terms of some comparative analysis. And I will invite you really to read the work of Hodgson, because he gives a lot of examples. I have published recently a book called Islam and the Trajectory of Globalization. It is open access book, so you can just download it for free. And I have dealt with a lot of those issues and try to show why idealism is the answer. Although it might look at this point like, well, everybody think about their self-interests. Why should we really care about values? Well, that's exactly what happened in the European Reformation. That's how Europe escaped its old ancient regime of feudalism. That's how the first Arabian society of tribal society of inner fighting has escaped its own bad condition by embracing idealism, Islamic idealism. And that's how the rest of the humanity really rose up from its own parochial conditions when it became committed to those universal values that are revealed, but at the same time, they are born with us. We are born with those values. They are part of our fitrah. Revelations just confirm them, affirm them, and strengthen them, and link us with movements as people whose agenda is to make sure that this world eventually be subjected to those high values. Okay, that's what I have for you. And
Yes,
thank you for your patience.
You're welcome. Thank you very much, Professor Louis, for your very informative and very detailed discussion just now. And again, I would like to warmly thank also the attendees for a very engaging discussion and also interesting question as well. And I believe if to those who wants to read more about the topic, maybe you can also get the book mentioned by Professor Louis just now. It's just Islam and the Trajectory of Globalization, if I'm not mistaken. That's the one, right?
That's correct. Yeah, it is by Routledge. By Routledge, and if you Google my name and the title, you'll find a page where you can download it freely.
Yes. So again, thank you very much for all who have joined us today, and inshallah, we'll see you guys again in the next Islam and Civilization Talk series. On behalf of IAS Malaysia, I'd like to thank everybody again. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. My pleasure.